Welcome back to the channel. I'm Ethan Blackwood. You may know me as the author of the Bigfoot thriller series, Shadows in the Timberline, along with a few other dark and twisted books that you can find over on Amazon. I spend a lot of my time writing fiction about the things that hunt us in the dark. But today, we aren't talking about fiction. Today, we are dealing strictly with terrifying facts. If you enjoy true tales from the deep woods, the kind of stories that make you double check your deadbolts before you go to sleep, do me a favor, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and turn on all notifications so that you never miss a trip into the unknown. All right, let's head into the woods. As an author, I spend a lot of time thinking about what makes the wilderness so frightening. But nothing I can put on a page compares to what actually happened in the early 1890s to a seasoned frontiersman named Bauman. Now, Bauman was a man who practically lived his entire life under a canopy of trees. He knew the woods, he respected the predators, and he knew how to survive off the land. He and his trapping partner were always looking for untouched territory, and they had caught wind of a very specific, incredibly remote pass deep in the Bitterroot Mountains, right on the jagged, unforgiving border between Idaho and Montana. Now, before they left, the local indigenous tribes had warned them about this specific area. They told the trappers it was a dark place, a place where the woods were unnaturally quiet, and where men had a bad habit of wandering in and never walking back out. But to Bauman and his partner, those were just warnings. They sounded like local superstition, maybe protecting an area overflowing with beaver and game. To them, danger just meant a bigger payday. So they packed up their mules and spent days trekking miles away from any semblance of civilization. They cut their way through dense, ancient pine forests until they found the absolute perfect spot. It was a small glade right next to an icy, fast-flowing stream. It was completely isolated. If anything went wrong out here, no one was coming to help them. But that was exactly how they liked it. They spent their first day chopping wood, building a sturdy, heavy timber lean-to shelter, and laying out their traps along the water. Everything was perfectly normal. It was a beautiful, quiet day in the mountains. The next morning, they woke up at dawn and spent the entire day wading through the freezing stream, checking their trap lines, and it was a highly successful haul. And as the sun started to dip below the tree line, casting long, menacing shadows through the woods, they headed back to camp, looking forward to the warm fire and a hot meal. But when they walked into their clearing, they stopped dead in their tracks. Their camp was completely destroyed. The heavy wooden lean-to that they had spent hours building was smashed to kindling. Their packs had been ripped open, and their supplies were scattered everywhere in the dirt. Immediately, Bauman unslung his rifle. Their first thought was that a massive grizzly bear had smelled their food and torn the place apart. But as Bauman walked cautiously into the center of the ruined camp, he looked down at the soft dirt near the ashes of the fire. There were footprints, but they weren't bear tracks. They were massive bear footprints, easily twice the size of a grown man's. And they clearly showed that whatever had done this was walking entirely on two legs. A heavy, suffocating, uneasy silence fell over the two men. They were master trackers, but neither of them could explain what they were looking at. Trying to shake off the creepy dread, they spent the rest of the evening silently rebuilding their shelter. They gathered their scattered gear, built the fire up as high and as bright as they could manage, and sat awake with their rifles loaded and resting across their laps. That night, somewhere around midnight, Bauman jolted awake. The fire had died down to a dull orange glow. Beside him, his partner had drifted off to sleep, but just outside the very edge of the firelight, out in the pitch-black woods, Bauman could hear the heavy, deliberate crunching of branches. Crunch, crunch. It was a slow, heavy two-legged stride. Something enormous was pacing in a perfect circle right around their camp. Bauman froze, his finger resting on the trigger of his rifle, staring into the dark. Suddenly, from the blackness of the trees, a low guttural echo moan ripped through the silence of the forest. It was a sound Bauman had never heard in all his years in the wild. It sounded almost human, but entirely too deep and resonant to come from a man. He fired his rifle blindly into the dark. The woods went dead silent. The pacing stopped, but neither man slept for a wink the rest of the night. When the sun finally came up, the woods felt entirely different. The peaceful wilderness now felt like a cage. As they went out to check their lines that next day, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Every time Bauman turned around, he expected to see something standing just inside the tree line. And worse, as they walked along the muddy banks of the stream, they found the exact same massive bipedal footprints. They were fresh, and they were following right behind them. Whatever had destroyed their camp was now actively stalking them in broad daylight. By noon, the men were terrified. The unspoken agreement was finally made. They were leaving. They couldn't survive another night out here. They hurried back to camp. Bauman told his partner to stay at the clearing, keep the fire roaring, and start packing up the mules. Bauman grabbed his rifle and said he was going to run down to the stream to gather up their last few expensive metal traps, and then they would immediately hike out of the mountains. Bauman rushed down to the water. In his panic, he fumbled with the heavy metal traps, his hands shaking in the freezing water. The entire time, he felt heavy eyes burning into the back of his neck. It took him a few hours to gather everything up. By the time he finally trudged back up the hill toward the glade, the sun was beginning to set. The woods were getting dark again. As Bauman stepped into the clearing, he called out to his partner. No answer. He looked toward the center of the camp. The fire was completely dead. The gear was only half packed. The mules were pacing nervously, pulling hard at their tethers. Bauman walked slowly toward the ruined lean-to, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then he looked past the ashes of the fire, toward the massive pine tree at the edge of the camp. His partner was sitting on the ground, his back propped against the trunk of the tree. Bauman walked closer, calling his name again. Still no answer. When Bauman was just a few feet away, he stopped. His partner's head was slumped forward at a horrifying, unnatural angle. His neck had been completely snapped. Bauman dropped his traps. He frantically checked the body, looking for a gunshot wound, a knife wound, or bite marks from a predator. There was not a single drop of blood. There were no scratches. Whatever had done this had simply walked up to an armed, experienced frontiersman, grabbed him, and effortlessly broke his neck. And then Bauman looked at the dirt directly in front of the body. Pressed deep into the soil were 4 massive bipedal footprints. The creature had stood directly over the dead man, lingering there, before simply turning around and walking back into the dark, silent woods. Bauman didn't pack the mules. He didn't bury his friend. He dropped his heavy gear, turned around, and ran blindly into the forest, leaving everything behind. He ran through the night until he finally reached civilization. He never returned to the Bitterroot Mountains. And as an author of cryptid fiction, I can tell you that the most chilling part of this story isn't the footprints or the broken neck. The most chilling part is that we know this story is true. Because years later, Bauman recounted the entire terrifying ordeal to a man who meticulously documented it. That man was the future president of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, who published the exact account of this Bigfoot encounter in his 1893 book, The Wilderness Hunter. In fact, this exact historical encounter is so fascinating and terrifying that it actually inspired one of my own books, Bigfoot, Teddy Roosevelt, a presidential cryptid expedition. It's a full-length horror thriller that takes this incredible piece of history and plunges you right back into those woods. If you want to find out what happens when Roosevelt goes looking for the beast himself, you can grab it right now on Amazon. There's even an audiobook version if you prefer to listen in the dark. I've left a link for you in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the woods.